Hello and welcome to the second session for Sport England on resilience and the road to recovery. Just a reminder, my name's Dr. Jim Rogers and today's session will be about how we can best support students now and during the recovery phase. So just a little reminder, in part one we just established our starting points. We talked about the potential physiological and psychological impact and response during school closures and social isolation, social distancing, and what we might expect as children come back into school and how we plan for that. Today is very specifically focused on how we can best support students. We're going to look at how we can support students from encouraging or creating a place of safety. We're going to look at the importance of relationships and rapport and that sense of team and connectivity and why that is important. And we're going to look at the implications for us as staff and this notion that behaviour is potentially contagious. So, one of the key kind of messages from this session that I'm presenting is around resilience coming from a foundation of safety. It's very easy to fall into a kind of mindset that resilience is about being tough. And it comes from adversity and testing and endurance and kind of resisting and being resilient to pressure and stress. Now there is an element of that, but actually, particularly when we're talking about young people, but actually any high performing team as well, resilience can only really be achieved from a foundation of safety. It's a really core message that I want to get across to you today. When we feel safe, we're more likely to be open, engaged. And if you remember that that chart I showed you in the first session, which was the Polyvagal Chart or the Polyvagal graph, we talked about stress pushing us into fight or flight or defense modes. And in that kind of state, we tend to be less open, less engaged. We don't sort of socially interact so well. So again, so one of the key messages is this kind of link between how we perceive the world and how we feel about things, and therefore how our behaviour plays out and our readiness to engage and to learn. So my first big question for you is how you make your students feel. How do you make your students feel? We know that this is important when you're teaching lessons. It's really important. But actually right now, when we're trying to deliver lessons remotely, and as we begin to open schools and how different those school environments are going to be, how we make our students feel is going to be really, really important. So I want you to spend just a moment just considering what you've done over the last 2 months in terms of connectivity with your students at home through your kind of remote teaching, and particularly how your students are going to feel as they come back into school. If schools have got that kind of yellow and black tape marking out the social distancing required in lessons, and students can't walk around classrooms and they can't get out and use sports facilities in the way that they did before, particularly teamwork, which we're going to come on to a second, we're going to have to work even harder to ensure that our students feel safe and secure and are open and ready to learn. Relationships and good relationships are absolutely fundamental to effective teaching and learning. It's one of those things that kind of we take for granted a little bit, but you will see in sport all the time that interaction, that kind of positive working relationship that you have with the students is intrinsic in effective teaching. And we see this in novice teachers that haven't had that opportunity to build rapport with students, will often struggle with their teaching. One of the key messages, and when you look at the PowerPoint alongside this presentation, this video clip gives you a really, really clear example of how important relationships are for mental health. It's a big thing at the minute. We are all struggling at some level, I think, with the impact of distancing and isolation, both ourselves as professionals and as people and as members of families, and also of course our students as well. So I just want to kind of reinforce this message that, you know, on one level it's great relationships aren't measured. They're not a performance target necessarily, but actually if we don't get this bit right, doesn't matter what the rest of it looks like, it's not going to work. In terms of implications for us, again, the situation we're in at the minute, so at the time of recording, year 10s are going to be going into school in the next week or so, and primary schools have just opened. There's a lot of discussion on social media and through Twitter, and there's a lot of pressure on the DfE at the minute in terms of clear messages around schools opening and what that looks like. One of the key things for you as a professional is that you need to remind yourself that you have a professional obligation when working with students to remain calm, positive, solution focused and engaged, because your physiological state and your behaviour is contagious. If you're a leader, if you're a middle leader, a leader of a department, this is particularly important as you begin to open up schools. Just as we would say that our students need to feel safe, our staff need to feel safe as well. So please just remind yourselves that it's important to check in on each other, make that connection, ensure everybody understands what the state of play is and what it's going to look like going forward. It's going to be absolutely crucial for our learners that we're in a good state of mind and ready to support the kids as they come back into school. This is something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, and it's the importance of maintaining or potentially creating a sense of team and belonging. What we know is that being part of a team and that kind of social connectivity enables effective communication, which you need for teaching. It improves trust, which is absolutely crucial in underpinning that sense of security and safety. It enables you to understand individual need and have that kind of inform what you're doing. I think that's really, really important. From a student's perspective, that kind of team ethic is important for well-being, for mental health, for that connectivity. And in the big picture, we know, kind of that team dynamic just makes things a whole load easier when you teach. And having fun with your lessons. The reason why I want to make a particular point on this at the minute is because this is going to be really, really difficult to manage with social distancing, and I know that some schools are looking at not having any team games and maybe looking at individual athletic performance or athletics and so on as lessons as schools begin to reopen. If that's the case, and there's obviously going to be really good reasons for that, you need to consider another way of ensuring you've got that kind of team dynamic and that sense of connectivity with your students. I think it's absolutely crucial, and again, it's something that you within sport and physical education can have a big impact on how successful this recovery phase is. Just in consideration of that, again, as we've talked about how you've made your students feel, how have you created and maintained a sense of team, both within your staff, but also with your students whilst they've been away from school? Have you been able to contact parents and students? Have you been able to maintain that connectivity? Have you contacted your team members? We know that many colleagues of ours live on their own, so have you checked in on their well-being? Have you maintained that sense of connectivity? I'm sure you have, but just a reminder of how important that is. Now, my old friend Joe Wicks, you'll remember from the first session that I am not Joe Wicks, but just a quick one on this. If I'm honest with you, it's great that schools have bought into this idea of having daily exercise for those students that are in school, and that's great. When Mr. Wicks announced that he wanted to be the nation's PE teacher, for me it undermined your professionalism, the skill and expertise that you have. And so, all joking aside, for me, you are the people that will have potentially the biggest impact on how well we can manage the recovery phase. You have all the skills, you have all of that expertise and knowledge, and if we can apply some of that perspective into how we support resilience, maintain that sense of connectivity and teamwork, I think we're going to be in a really, really good place. Just very specifically in managing trauma, you remember again in the first session we talked about trauma as a potential physiological response to the current situation. We may have students coming in that are struggling. They may react to the new kind of structure of schools and the new kind of dynamic. And there's just 3 little tips here that I've picked up on from the work of Ian Hunkin that I've referenced before. We'll look at again in session 3, and it's about how we can best support students going through that kind of traumatic experience. One of the key messages is about not necessarily offering solutions or resolutions, but to empathise. So empathy is our key kind of lever in our interaction with somebody who's really, really struggling, and that could be a member of staff as well. On the PowerPoint, you'll see empathise written there in orange and underlined. If you click on there, it takes you to a really good little YouTube clip by Brene Brown, who does some fantastic work on well-being and the skills involved in effective empathy. Walking or slow rhythmic activity promotes calm, and breathing exercise can also promote calm. Now, I'll be really honest with you, when I did my research around this and I've seen this in action, I've never really understood why that worked. And you know, you often see people who have a bit of a panic attack and you ask them to breathe, take some deep breaths, take them for a walk. But what we understand is physiologically that rhythm can bring somebody from that heightened state of stress and an emotional reaction back to a place where we can begin to engage and rationalize the situation. So if you find yourself in a situation where somebody's really, really struggling, just consider your interaction with them in terms of empathy, in terms of how we manage that person and allow them to bring themselves back into a state of readiness. Again, I'm making a particular point of this, one, because we can anticipate this may be a situation that we have to face, but also, you know, how we manage to do this with social distancing and how we can move children around away from places of potential stress or triggers when we have to maintain that 2-meter distance is going to be a challenge, and it's one of the things that you're going to have to think about. So that's the end of session 2 on supporting students. Session 3 is going to be a little bit more focused on pedagogy and mastery, and how we can use sport and what we understand about how children learn, particularly in the minute whilst we're going through this kind of recovery phase, to begin to kind of shape the right support and the right teaching and learning. So I hope you found this useful. Just a reminder, you've got a PowerPoint alongside this that you can click on those couple of links, and I shall see you in session 3. Cheers, bye.